Meeting on March 30th in the Bemis room. I presume it's at 9 o'clock. After this speech, there's going to be a reception at the Lurie Conference Room in the University Center. It's been changed. It's not the Persky Room, but the Lurie Conference Room. And side note, people from the Rape Crisis Center are here tonight. And after the speech, they will be waiting in the back. And if you have any questions about their organization or any of the services they offer, they welcome you to go and talk to them. Tonight, we at the Clark University Speakers Forum are honored to introduce to you Nancy Ziegenmeyer. On November 19th, 1988, just before she was supposed to take a real estate exam, she was reviewing her notes before the test in her car. While studying, the driver's door opened suddenly, and a man smelling of alcohol told her to move over. Mrs. Ziegenmeyer tried to fight off the stranger, but the man was stronger than her. The stranger then kidnapped Mrs. Ziegenmeyer and raped her. On November 19, 1988, Nancy Ziegenmeyer became a rape victim. Nancy Ziegenmeyer became the victim of what the New Expanded Webster Dictionary calls a seizing by violence, carnal knowledge of a woman against her will. What this definition left out was the horror and pain of being violated emotionally as well as physically, of having someone trying to take away your dignity. What this definition left out was the courage and the strength of character and soul it takes to survive being brutally scarred for life. For Nancy Ziegenmeyer, this objective definition became a subjective reality. During her ordeal with her pain and the stagnant legal system, Nancy Ziegenmeyer became a rape survivor. Since the day the man who raped her was convicted, Mrs. Ziegenmeyer has not only survived, but reached out to help others. Besides being one of the nation's leading advocates for rape survival, an active lobbyist at the state and at the federal level for promoting legislation for rape victims, in 1990, Nancy Ziegenmeyer broke the universal silence within the media concerning rape victims. It was an unsaid rule in the media to never reveal the name or any other identifying information concerning rape victims. On February 25th, 1990, Nancy Ziegenmeyer offered her name and her story to the world. Some say that because of her openness and courage, Nancy Ziegenmeyer has destigmatized rape victims. By giving her name, Nancy Ziegenmeyer has replaced the amorphous term of rape victim with an actual name. She changed the perception of rape victims throughout the media. She helped make rape victims human again, in the eyes of the media and the people they touched. Would you please give a warm Clark welcome to Ms. Nancy Ziegenmeyer.
Rape is a brutal act of violence that will touch 1 out of 3 women. A rape occurs once every 6 minutes of every day in this country. A woman is 10 times more likely to be raped than killed in a car accident in this country. I think given the staggering magnitude of the crime of rape, it's appalling and shocking to know that of all of those rapes, only 1 in 10 will be reported. I'm a rape survivor. I was raped on a Saturday morning, November 19th, 1988, in a college parking lot at 7:05 in the morning. I had gone there to take a real estate test, which was to be at 7:30, and I was sitting in my car studying my notes one last time. All of the car doors were locked, except for the one nearest to me. A man suddenly opened my door, grabbed my neck, and he ordered me to get over in the car. He screamed, and I turned towards him. I tried to fight him away from me, to scratch his eyes or anything, just to do something to get away from him. But he was much stronger than I was, and he overpowered me and got into my car. He was still holding onto my neck, and he told me to quit fighting or he was going to kill me. So I chose to quit fighting. He forced me over into the passenger side of the car, and then he reached over me and reclined the seat that I was sitting in to its flattest position and he placed a dish towel that he brought with him over my face so that I couldn't see him. Then he reached into the back seat of the car and grabbed my denim jacket and put it over my whole body. And then he began driving. I knew that I was going to try to get out of the car somehow. I just wasn't sure how I was going to do that. So I leaned slightly forward, tried to slip my hand out from underneath the jacket up towards the lock on the door. And he saw me, and he seemed to panic. I think he thought that I was going to look at him, and he told me to quit looking at him. That if I tried to look at him again, that he was going to kill me, and he slammed me back into the seat. I knew at that point that I was not going to be able to escape from him. So I thought about a lot of things. I thought, would I ever see my husband again? Would I ever see my children again? Basically, how long did I have left to live? Was this man going to kill me? Finally, I had moved my coat enough so that I could see out from underneath it. He pulled into a driveway. After we'd been driving around, he pulled into a driveway, and he honked the horn twice. And I was really scared because I thought he was either going to take me into the house or more men were going to come out and get into the car. But we sat there for about 45 seconds, and he finally backed out, and I was very happy that I wasn't taken in or no more men got in. We were driving again, and I started to look for street signs, but all I could see was the tops of the trees from the position that the seat was lying in. The whole time that we'd been driving around, my kidnapper kept up a constant stream of chatter. He talked about slavery. He talked about the rape of his sister by a white man. He asked who I had voted for. Excuse me. He asked me who I'd voted for in the last election, how I had paid for my car, and then he told me that he wasn't going to kill me because I had children and that no child should have to grow up without a parent. I lied to him about who I had voted for. I told him I didn't vote because I didn't know what the right answer would be. I told him that I had children and that my husband paid for my car. I tried to answer all of his questions that he asked me in such a manner that perhaps was going to help me stay alive. We stopped again, and we seemed to be in some sort of parking lot once again. We were parked next to a building that had crooked eave spouts on it. That's where he raped me. When he was finished, he got back into the driver's seat, and he told me that I had better not have given him AIDS. I tried to pull my clothes back on, but he wouldn't let me put them back on until we started driving around again. He told me that I was white and that I could go home to my family, my husband, and get counseling, and that I would be just fine. He was quiet then again until we returned to that same parking lot. Once again, I was terrified because I thought he was going to rape me. Instead, what he did was took my wedding rings off of my finger, took the dish towel that he had brought with him, and he wiped down everything in the car that he had touched, including my arms and my hands. He then ordered me to get down on the floor, and he covered me with my coat once again while I was on the floor. And he told me that he had someone in the neighborhood with a car, and that they was going to pick him up, and that he would follow me to the interstate to make sure that I went back to Grinnell and not go to the police. But if I did go to the police, he instructed me that I was to tell them that he was white and to say nothing else at all. He told me that he had my purse. He knew that I had children, knew where I lived. He said if he was caught, that he had brothers that would come back and do something to my family and my children. He then got out of the car, and I reached across the car, and I locked the door, staying on the floor so that he couldn't see me. And the last thing he'd said to me was to stay on the floor for 10 minutes. I stayed there for about a minute. I got up and I looked around, and I didn't see anyone, so I started driving myself. I had no intentions of going to the hospital once I was raped. I was lost, and I didn't know where I was at, and I literally just came upon a hospital and knew that it would be a safe place to go. I still was reluctant to go into the hospital. My sexual past had not been spotless, And I was certain that people were going to blame me for what had happened to me. People were going to think that I was a whore and had somehow asked for what this man had done to me. I thought that the rape was going to have to be reported, and I thought everyone would know about it, and I didn't want that. I think that any rape counselor will tell you that this is the way virtually every rape victim feels. And I believe that it's for that very reason that only 1 out of 10 rapes are ever reported. If you're ever raped, it's essential to go to the hospital immediately. It's essential for at least 4 reasons. Your psychological health, you've been traumatized, and you're going to need a great deal of support and healing. Your physical health, you're in danger of having contracted a variety of diseases, including AIDS. For the preservation of evidence, and to alert the police that there's a rapist on the loose, and perhaps enable them to prevent this from happening to someone else. You'll be in a very precarious emotional state, and you're going to need lots of help in healing. My experience at the hospital was that the people in Des Moines cared. This is unfortunately not the case everywhere, and I don't think that there's probably any way to adequately prepare a victim for the further intrusion of a rape exam. I think all I can do is to perhaps tell them what happens during that exam. First, they're going to take a statement from you. That first law officer that took a statement from me, I don't remember what he asked me. I don't even remember what I answered. But I know that I was asked whether there was penetration, and if so, where. You'll be asked whether the rapist wore a condom, whether you cleaned yourself up or changed your clothes at all, and whether you were injured or bleeding, and what the suspect's race was, and other identifying information about him, and whether you'd had consensual sex within the previous 72 hours. Then they're going to ask for a description of the rape from the beginning to the end. All of your clothing and undergarments are going to be collected and placed in separate marked paper bags, stapled shut and labeled as evidence. They're then going to perform a physical exam to check for injuries and to collect the evidence. Your head hair and your pubic hairs will be combed looking for foreign debris, and some hair from both places will be pulled to compare with whatever they've found combing. Then they'll swab not only your vagina, but your mouth and your rectum as well, whether or not you've been sodomized. Saliva and blood samples are going to be taken. I never saw the clothes in which I was raped until the day of the trial. I was not given them back because the state of Iowa had to keep them as evidence. The Rape Crisis Center furnished gray sweat clothes for me to wear home from the hospital. The police are not going to be called unless a rape victim consents to it. Going through the rape with a stranger is not going to be easy, but it's very, very important to do. You should tell them everything that you can remember. And if you don't remember, it's okay to tell them that you don't remember. This may help them to apprehend someone and possibly prevent this man from doing this to another woman. After the rape, I quickly learned that I was going to need a lot of support. I made my husband get up and walk to the bathroom with me if I needed to go at nighttime. I was scared to let the children play outside in the yard. I wanted them in the house, in my sight at all times. Any hopes that I'd ever had of becoming a real estate agent were gone. I could never go into an empty house with someone that I didn't know again, so that was never an option for me to go back and do that. I couldn't leave my house by myself. I couldn't go grocery shopping. I wouldn't answer the door if Stephen wasn't home. This continued for almost a year. And I realized that the violation against me had grown into a violation against my entire family. My whole family had become as much of an emotional hostage to this man as I had become. Throughout it all, Stephen remained very supportive. When I had days that I didn't feel like I could function, he'd stay home, he'd watch the children, and he'd fix the meals, and clean the house, do the laundry. But the most important thing that Stephen never did was he never blamed me, and he never rejected me for what had happened to me. That's not to say that Stephen didn't have a great deal of problems with the fact that I had been raped. He was very angry at the rapist. He drank a lot to forget about it, to help himself to cope with what had happened. But again, even when he was drinking, he didn't blame me and he didn't reject me for having been raped. Unfortunately, I think that the Stephens of this world are probably few and far between. In my opinion, the vast majority of men involved with rape women become victims themselves because we as a society cannot even deal with the victim, let alone the victim's significant others. I don't think that we need to look much further than some of our popular television shows. A couple of them. In the first Hill Street Blues, the character Vinny was in love with a woman who was brutally raped. They ultimately broke up because he couldn't handle his anger that she had been violated. More recently in LA Law, the character Victor was in love with a woman who had been raped. And that relationship also broke up for a variety of complex reasons. Unfortunately, I believe that these shows accurately depict real life. When I was first approached by people about doing a television show on what had happened to me, I wasn't sure that I wanted that much notoriety. Then I thought about how great it would be to have perhaps a positive role model portrayed nationally. Stephen had his faults, but he stood by me and he supported me at a point in my life in which I needed a great deal of support to get through. I thought that because television plays such an influential part in our lives, this portrayal of a positive, significant other would have a great impact on how loved ones treated victims in the future. However, when I received the first screenplay, the first draft of the screenplay, Stephen was portrayed as one more weak, unsupportive, self-indulgent jerk. And that was probably one of the things that I put my foot down the hardest about in the movie. And it was changed in that. Dr. Benjamin Saunders of the South Carolina's Crime Victim and Research Treatment Center has been studying the effects of rape, a woman's rape, on the man in her life. Surprisingly enough, the men in the survey felt some of the same feelings that the rape victim had: loss of control and anger at the system. Additionally, Dr. Saunders found out that these men feel guilty because they were unable to protect the woman, and they felt anger at her because she was somewhat dysfunctional, and because he didn't think that she was healing quickly enough. Most tragically, though, some of the men in this survey felt anger at the survivor because they thought she had asked for it in some way. And whether or not there are organized support groups for men involved with rape survivor, I would encourage all men to seek counseling after this has happened in their family. In addition to Stephen's help in my process of healing, I had a rape counselor who also supported me and helped me to heal. She was too far away for me to visit with every day, but we maintained very, very close contact by telephone. I'm not going to kid you, there's probably no amount of counseling in this world that's going to make the experience of rape go away. What counseling can do, however, is to help you put the experience into perspective. By this, I mean it will help the survivor know that the rape was not her fault, and to help her regain control of her feelings and learn how to cope with life after rape. The procedure is not an easy one for the counselor or the victim. That's because I think anybody's initial instincts, including a rape counselor's, are to insulate and protect the survivor. And most generally, I think the survivor wants to be insulated and protected. But these instincts are probably not healthy ones when one considers that the survivor has already lost a significant degree of control in her life. I don't think it's helpful or healthy for another person, even a rape counselor or a husband, to come into her life and take it over for her, even for the most sympathetic or humanitarian reasons. She needs to learn that she has decisions, that she can regain control of her life. In fact, I think a counselor's function is to provide a safe place for a rape victim as she heals. A victim initially is going to blame herself, and it's helpful for her to have a rape counselor who will listen to her reasons for that self-blame and to help her diffuse that blame. I think it is, however, important for a rape victim to know that if her case is one that does go to trial, the counselor may be required to give testimony and release some relevant portions of her record. I think even more latitude is given the defense attorney during the discovery process. This phase of the process is designed to uncover information which might lead to relevant information, but what is uncovered will not necessarily be admitted into trial. Now, I do not tell you this to deter you from seeking counseling. However, I think my job as a victim advocate is to tell you all of the possible problems that might arise. And probably one of the main things is that our system is not a perfect system. I think, however, it's important for a victim to tell someone how she feels, what she thinks, what she fears. And I think counselors are especially important for those victims who can't tell their husbands or their boyfriends or their friends these things and these feelings. Unfortunately, a counselor cannot wave a magic wand and heal the victim. It's the victim herself or himself that must make that transition from victim to survivor. It may take months, it may take years for this transition to occur. And I think it's a process not unlike Alcoholics Anonymous, where the alcoholic must stand up and say, I am an alcoholic. So must a rape victim stand up and say, I am a rape victim. Now, by this, I don't mean to downplay the importance of a counselor in the victim's life, but like AA or any other structured counseling program, until the victim makes the decision that they're no longer going to give control to the rapist, I don't think that they can begin to heal. A rape victim needs to regain control through knowing that she's not to blame. All rape victims do not heal in the same way or at the same pace. And in this respect, I don't think society has any more right to dictate to a victim how he or she heals, any more than it has the right to blame the victim as opposed to the perpetrator. For instance, it's been one of my causes to fight for confidentiality laws. Proponents of publishing rape victims' names and other identifying materials argue that because the rape victim is not at fault, his or her name should be in the realm of public information. These people allege that sunshine is the best disinfectant. This might be fine for some victims, but too much sunshine can burn other victims. It wasn't fine for me to have my name in the realm of public information until I'd done a great deal of private healing. And I think to demand that every victim, whatever the circumstances of her rape or her life, proceed in lockstep through a set pattern that society dictates to them to be correct is not a good idea. I don't think that we can assume that the proper road to healing is, number one, immediately publish all victims' names. And number two, put each victim into a counseling program. And number three, prosecute the perpetrator. Because I think for some victims, this may be more than they can bear. For some of the victims, it's best to begin healing privately with perhaps their loved ones, going into counseling first. For others, maybe what is best is to go to counseling themselves right away. And for yet others, the best course might be to go themselves to the newspaper and say, publish my name. I have been hurt and I have been wronged, and I want the whole world to know. I think the mode and the method of healing is as individual as each person's fingerprints. Society must dictate how their healing should be done, nor should it permit their names to be forced into the realm of public information unless or until that victim knows that they're ready for that to occur. Any rape survivor should know that even with counseling, years later something might trigger a panic attack or a flashback directly related to the rape. In my particular case, I thought that I'd recovered, I thought I'd healed, and I thought I was okay. And then I accompanied a friend to the hospital. It was the first time I'd been in a hospital since I was sexually assaulted. And the hospital, the smell of the hospital was overwhelming to me. And I panicked. I mean, I could feel the rapist touching me. I could smell him. I could taste him. And I ran out of the hospital. I went home and I took a shower. I stood in the shower until it ran cold, and it reminded me of how I used to take showers immediately following the rape. And after that happened, I knew I was not okay, and I knew that I needed counseling still, and so I began counseling again. Now, the police found a suspect in early December. His name was Bobby Lee Smith. His girlfriend had pawned the wedding rings that he'd taken from my finger the morning of the rape. The policeman, the investigating officer, was very dedicated to the case. He'd found my rings after going from pawn shop to pawn shop, and I later identified the man who raped me through a series of mug shots. When I first became involved with the judicial system, I imagined that the prosecutor was my lawyer. After all, I was the one who had been raped. I was the one whose children's lives had been threatened. I was the one who was terrified to leave my own house by myself. Instead, what I found was that I was almost inconsequential to the whole process. The prosecutor made decisions that I not only had zero input into, but some of them I was never even informed of. For instance, the man who raped me's girlfriend's trial for pawning my wedding rings was scheduled, and I'd been subpoenaed, and I was ready to testify. The morning that the trial was to begin, they plea bargained with her. The trial never occurred. I was in the dark as to the whole procedure of that trial. Another example of not being informed was when I didn't hear about one of the continuances until a newspaper reporter called me and told me of it. So I guess one suggestion that I would make is to keep the victims informed of the trial's timetable, including any of the continuances, because the trial for a rape victim becomes central to their lives, and I think that the small courtesy could alleviate a lot of the pressures and a lot of the uncertainties that rape victims feel in our system. I would like to see it become just a part of regular office practice to copy these orders to the victim from the prosecutor's office. Well, this didn't happen to me. I know that deals with alleged rapists are cut all the time, most of them without consultation or knowledge of the victim. And I know that it would probably be unrealistic to ask that the victim have input into the decision to plea bargain. However, the victim has shown that she's willing to put everything on the line. So I think once again we at least need to keep her informed of what we're doing in the prosecutor's office. I also had a problem with the fact that the defendant could sit at the table with his counsel and talk with counsel whenever he wished. The decision that was made in my particular case was not only could I not sit with the prosecutor, I was not even allowed to be in the courtroom during the trial. I guess now I sort of understand why the prosecutor made that decision. The rationale behind that decision was that she thought that I would lose an emotional edge, that the jury would get used to seeing me be around the rapist without being upset. But I think we need to be aware of how important it is for the rape victim to take part in the proceedings in some meaningful way. What I was left with were confusing inconsistencies. Whatever Bobby Lee Smith told his counsel was privileged information. Whatever I told the state of Iowa was public record. In essence, Bobby Lee Smith, the rapist, had the right to counsel. I did not. My role was a mere witness, not a party to any of the proceedings. Now, if this rule cannot change, I think we need to at least be aware of how difficult and confusing it is to someone who has already been victimized once. We cannot continue to allow rape victims to be victimized twice. The second the second time at the hands of our courts. I think that the victim should be treated with common courtesy and respect. Now, my rape was a stranger rape, or a real rape, as Susan Estridge, author of the book Real Rape, puts it. By far the more common type of rape is non-stranger, acquaintance, date rape. 75 to 80% of rapes that happen in this country are perpetrated by someone that the victim knows. Oftentimes, acquaintance rape is not recognized or labeled as rape because of the initial voluntary contact between the victim and the perpetrator. Nationally, the majority of reported victims and offenders are of college age, with the rate of rape highest among 16 to 19-year-olds. I think that there's a variety of reasons for this high-risk environment. College students often feel invincible. They're away from direct parental supervision for perhaps the first time in their lives. They feel a very strong need to experiment with their sexual impulses, and peer pressures can become very, very demanding. Women must remember that it's okay to say no and to mean it. Even if you've had consensual sex with a man, once you say no, it's that point that sex no longer is okay. It becomes rape. I think we, just as importantly, we must teach this to our sons. Frequently, the rapes that occur on college campuses happen at fraternities and student dormitories. Unfortunately, these rapes involve alcohol, drugs, athletes, and more often than not, fraternity parties involve all of those things. I think when a woman becomes drunk at a party, I think the men at that party have several options. They can choose to ignore her, they can choose to help her, or they can choose to exploit her. All too often, I think the wrong decision is being made. When a rape occurs, the victim is devastated. She once again tends to blame herself for even being there. More often than not, the victim will leave school. The difference between stranger and non-stranger rape is that stranger rape is the show of power through sex, whereas non-stranger rape is the use of power to obtain sex. However, in both cases, the women are viewed as weak and vulnerable, and the trauma experienced in both types of rape are very, very similar. I think those feelings are shame, guilt, fear, disbelief, and lowered self-esteem. The acquaintance rape victim tends to blame herself more because of the initial contact between her and the perpetrator, and she finds that people are less likely to believe her than in a stranger rape. The first step, however, in taking control of your life back is your decision to press charges. Now, in court proceedings, the same laws and penalties apply to acquaintance rape as stranger rape. In a campus disciplinary hearing, the penalties would only include expulsion with no ability to return, suspension from for a specified time, exclusion from certain parts of the campus, and for mandatory counseling. Now, criminal charges concerning this type of rape are difficult to file and successfully prosecute. The key word, of course, being successfully. And I know that prosecutors like to win every case. However, I wonder if sometimes it would be good to prosecute a good losing case just to send a message rather than to accept a poor plea bargain. And that message would be that the state is not afraid to confront the difficult cases, and it's no longer going to fear the consent defense. Some matters are out of the hands of prosecutors, though, and into the hands of legislators. I think awareness is slowly growing that the system is letting women down. Some time ago, I testified before the Senate Judicial Subcommittee in support of passing federal legislation which will, among other things, provide $300 million to states to combat violence directed against women. Grants would include funds to increase prosecution rates, which are characterized in legislation as being notoriously low. Pursuant to this legislation, prosecutors would obtain specialized training and special units of prosecutors would be established. The legislation would place sex-based crimes under the Civil Rights Acts. And federal penalties would include double penalties for rape and aggravated rape. It would create new penalties for prior sex offenders. And it would require victim restitution in sex crime cases. In the meantime, however, prosecutors can do much to alleviate some of the fears and concerns of rape victims. At the time that the prosecutors meet the rape victims are generally still in deep trouble, if not physically, probably emotionally. I found out later that many resources are available to rape victims. In Iowa, we had the Iowa Coalition Against Sexual Assault. There is a national coalition against sexual assault. We have the National Organization for Victims Assistance, the National Victims Center, and thousands of county rape crisis centers that you can go to. And all of these agencies are willing to work with prosecutors. And I guess that I would encourage all of you to check with your county attorney to make sure that those resources are available to them. The way that I became a victim advocate was in 1989. Stephen had read an editorial written by Geneva Overholzer in the Des Moines Register. It stated that in sheltering rape victims' names and faces, the media might actually be perpetuating the stigma of rape. Stephen brought it to me and said that I should read this, that maybe I should think of doing something like this. Stephen and I talked about some of the stigmas of rape. It seemed that so much emphasis was put on complete irrelevancies, such as what was the victim doing? What was she wearing? Did she know him? What was her sexual history? Did she date a lot? Did she hang out in bars? How had she asked for it? We both knew firsthand that none of those questions mattered. The only question that ever matters in a rape case is whether or not there was consent. Even in an acquaintance rape, where the victim invites a man into her home, into her life, she does not invite this man to rape her. So Stephen and I debated whether I should answer this editorial for about 3 weeks. When I finally decided that if there was a chance by my coming forward that I could help other rape survivors, then I would come forward and I would go public with my name. So I contacted Ms. Overholzer. I was still somewhat reluctant or hesitant to share my story with yet another stranger. So Stephen accompanied me and supported me through the entire procedure. Geneva was, of course, excited that someone was willing to come forward. And the articles, a series of 5 parts to be published after the trial, was written, and the Register braced itself for a flurry of cancellations, outrage, and negative reactions. Stephen and I readied ourselves as well for embarrassed relatives, lost friendship, and hate mail. And none of those things happened. The reaction was positive. Since going public, I've received hundreds of letters and phone calls from rape survivors like myself. My story has been published in newspapers around the world. I've done dozens of radio and television shows. And the reaction continues to be positive, which I think is a good sign. It says to us that society is ready to listen to what's happening to women. Women who had never told anyone that they were raped have written to me thanking me for coming forward because they now felt less alone and less isolated. Some of them have even contacted counselors of their own to get help after years of silence and secrecy. So part of my goal here tonight at Clark is to make sure that all of you know that there are a range of services available for rape survivors. For instance, in Iowa, we, of course, have the rape crisis centers, the county ones. I use the national ones. Anyone can use the national rape crisis centers. Here at Clark, I know that you have, here in your town, you have a rape crisis center. You can go to RAs. There are a number of people that you can go to here. encourage all of you to talk among yourselves on where you would go, how you would help support one another if this happened to one of your friends. I think it's also very important to know that there are support groups for husbands and for significant others of rape survivors in many of the locations, because that's just as important. The significant other is a secondary victim of this crime. Ultimately, I think what really matters is how society itself views rape survivors. I don't think it matters whether the woman was a nun or a prostitute, whether she was 9 or 90, whether she had on blue jeans or a mini skirt. But unfortunately, society hears the word rape and thinks sex. When a rape victim hears the word rape, they think death. Rape is a crime of violence, not desire. It's an attempt to dominate, degrade, humiliate, and control. This is not to say that society is not progressing in its attitude towards rape survivors. 5 or 10 years ago, I may have been ostracized for coming forward. Instead, I received incredible support. However, I think a lot remains to be done. I think rape survivors should be given a more active role in the criminal justice system. If they want to actively participate, I think that we should encourage them rather than discourage them. And also, I want to reiterate what I said earlier. I do not support publishing rape survivors' names, their stories, or their faces without their consent. I think that such indiscriminate use of this information could only lead to further victimization. What I do support is an end to the cruel stigma attached to this very, very violent crime. Until we as a society can channel our outrage at the perpetrator as opposed to the rape survivor, rape will always be an unspeakable crime, and the victim will always be a victim rather than a survivor. I want to thank all of you for allowing me to bring my message here to you tonight. Please let's all continue to work together for enhanced victims' rights. Thank you. Before I take any questions, I want to ask that if there is any media here in the room tonight, or if anyone's tape recording this, that all cameras, audio and video be shut off, and anyone here in media form either